When autumn slipped down from the hills and left behind charred strips of forest, Mark arrived on Highway 47, where the road goes deep into the hills, lost among sparse pines and empty roadside signs. The 9th kilometer. The very place where the cars disappeared and where, according to eyewitnesses, the air began to vibrate from the unnatural light. He got out of the car, closing the door with a soft click, as if he was afraid to wake up something sleeping under the asphalt. The sky was low, and clouds the color of lead were shaking in the wind. It was as if the whole world was silent, listening to his footsteps. The road seemed endless, but it was the 9th kilometer that was marked by a faded sign with the number 9, skewed and almost gnawed by time. There are traces of an old campfire on the side of the road, scattered cans, tire tracks that end abruptly, like a cut thread. He turned on the recorder and said in a tired voice, "Highway 47, Mark 9. The time is 21:43. Testing the hypothesis of light and whispers." After a short pause, he added, "If someone hears this, then I was right." His camera was mounted on a tripod, pointing at the emptiness of the road. The night was falling fast. The sun, as if in a hurry to hide, settled behind the hills, and instantly everything turned bluish-black. The first few minutes of silence seemed ordinary, but Mark felt something elusive, as if life was pulsing under the skin of the road, barely noticeable, but alive. The air was trembling, and somewhere in the distance something was flickering, as if someone had lit a lamp and immediately extinguished it. He had heard the stories about a trucker who saw a light in the form of a human figure standing right on the highway, and then did not get in touch again. About a young couple who disappeared a meter away from that very sign. About the cops who didn't dare to search at night. It all seemed like a legend until he received an anonymous letter, an envelope containing only a photograph, a piece of road, wet from the rain, and a shadow standing in the middle of the strip. No man, no car, just a shadow. Mark was a journalist, but lately there had been more of an obsessive streak in him. He lost his wife 2 years ago in a car accident. The car overturned on the highway and flew into a ditch, and he could never remember how it happened. There was only a buzzing in my ears, a flash of light, and then silence. Since then, he has been attracted to roads, especially those where people disappeared. Perhaps he wasn't looking for news, but for an answer. He was standing near the camera, recording the night breath of the highway. The wind blew down from the hills, bringing the smell of dampness and iron. Branches were cracking somewhere, as if someone was slowly breaking them in the dark. After half an hour, nothing appeared on the footage except dust and darkness. But when he got closer to the 9 sign, his breathing stopped. There was something like moisture glistening on the asphalt, but as he bent down, he realized it wasn't water. The surface of the road pulsed like the skin of a living being, as if light flickered through the cracks, flickering from within. He swiped his finger, and the light disappeared immediately. He returned to the car to record the observations, but something had changed. The camera's display showed noises, alternating dark streaks and flashes similar to lightning, but inside them there were outlines of figures. At first, he thought it was a glitch. Then he realized that the camera was seeing something he couldn't see. He froze, looking at the camera. For a moment, a flash illuminated the road, and there, right by the sign, stood a shadow. Human, but too elongated, like a reflection searching for its body. She didn't move, just seemed to breathe in the light. He tried to turn off the camera, but realized that his hand wouldn't work. My fingers were numb, and I couldn't breathe. Everything became viscous, like a dream. The shadow slowly turned towards him. At that moment, the air around him tightened, the sound disappeared, and Mark felt not pain, but a memory. A flash of light, his wife's scream, and a black funnel into which his own voice falls. He fell to his knees, feeling the road move beneath him. The darkness seemed to grow into him, creeping under his fingernails, into his eyes, into his thoughts. When he woke up, everything was as before. The camera was flashing red, recording the emptiness. The sky cleared, the wind died down. He looked at his watch. It had only been 8 minutes. But inside, it felt like he had lived the whole night. He checked the record. The footage shows only himself, standing in the middle of the road, staring into the void. But in the reflection of his headlights, a second figure flashed for a moment, as if someone was standing behind his shoulder. He was sleeping in the car, but the dream did not bring peace. In the dark, he dreamed of flashes, white and blinding, with faces inside them. They were unrecognizable, but they were all whispering something, as if they were asking for help. When he woke up, the dawn was gloomy and gray. The fog enveloped the road like smoke. He went outside and saw that the 9 sign had disappeared. In its place is a dent in the ground, smooth and even, as if someone had torn the metal out by the roots. The tire tracks on the side of the road ended exactly there. He realized that something had happened during the night that the camera had not recorded. He decided to explore the area. There was a narrow lane running along the road leading towards the hill. This path was not marked on the old maps. He walked slowly, feeling the ground getting softer under his feet. The fog was thickening. Trees, like dead witnesses, stood along the path, and their branches intertwined above it, forming a vault. A few minutes later, he came out to the old bridge. There was a dry riverbed below him, but there was something rustling below, as if the stones were whispering to each other. He listened and realized that it wasn't the wind. They were words, muffled, almost human. All he could make out was his name. At that moment, for the first time, he felt that the place knew him. That the shadow he saw wasn't an accident. She was waiting for him. Probably a long time ago. Mark returned to the car, but as he got closer, he stopped. The door was open, even though he remembered locking it. Inside there is a camera, a voice recorder, everything is in place. Only someone had left a mark on the dashboard, a handprint covered in something as dark as soot. He wiped it off, but the mark didn't disappear. On the contrary, it became brighter, as if absorbed into the metal. The road looked normal during the day. But in the sunlight, he noticed strange distortions. The horizon seemed to tremble, and the air above the asphalt bent, creating the illusion that the highway was alive. Mark turned on his laptop and began reviewing old materials, interviews, police reports, satellite images. In some of them, the 9th kilometer looked different, as if the picture had been shifted and part of the road had disappeared. In the archives, he found a mention of an ancient settlement that stood here before the construction of the highway. The village was called Millwood. People disappeared during a fire almost 100 years ago. The witnesses then spoke of night glare, light from the ground, and voices. All this was attributed to hallucinations. But a picture began to form in his head. The road was built in a place where the boundary between the worlds was not a convention, but a wound. By evening, he decided to stay one more night. He set up the camera closer to the bridge, where he heard whispers. I checked all the equipment twice. The wind was picking up, the sky was frowning again, and thunder rumbled in the distance. He turned on the recorder. The second night. Surveillance is underway at the old bridge. I assume that the light source is not an atmospheric phenomenon. After that, he sat by the campfire, watching the coals crackle in the dark. There was a strange feeling as if the fire was not giving off heat. He looked at the flames and saw silhouettes inside them, thin, disembodied. When he blinked, they were gone. Towards midnight, the camera recorded a flash. Faint at first, then brighter. Mark got up and pointed the flashlight in that direction. The bridge seemed to come to life, sparks ran along its beams, as if through the nerves of a living body. And then he heard a scream. Not loud, but shrill, as if someone was calling from inside the earth. He ran towards the source of the sound. The fog parted, revealing a pit under the bridge. Below, among the clay and roots, something was shimmering. He came down, clutching the lantern. The light picked out a smooth glass surface from the darkness. Under a layer of dirt lay a mirror, large and broken, like an ancient fragment of a wall. And for a second he saw himself in it, but the reflection moved differently. His face looked older, his eyes empty. And there was a figure standing behind him. The same shadow as before. Only now she was closer. He turned abruptly, and there was no one there. Only the sound of the wind. When he looked in the mirror again, the shadow remained, but now it stared straight into his eyes, not moving. He took a step back, stumbled and fell. The lantern went out. The silence deepened in the darkness. And suddenly the mirror flashed, blinding with light. Mark felt a crackling sound inside his skull, as if a thread had snapped in his head. He saw images, the road, flames, cars falling into the abyss, people's faces stretched out in a scream. Everything is mixed up. He realized that these people had not disappeared. They stayed here, in the reflection, in the shadows, under a layer of asphalt. When he came to his senses, the sky was already gray. The birds were not singing. The bridge stood dead and silent. There was no mirror. Only a pit full of dirty water remained in the ground, in which his face was reflected. But the reflection was smiling. He returned to the car, hardly believing that all this was not a dream. The recording on the recorder stopped at the moment when he approached the bridge. The rest is silence. He looked in the rearview mirror and was startled. There was a shadowy figure sitting in the back seat, but when he blinked, no one was there. Her heart was beating fast, and her breathing was uneven. He started the engine and drove away, deciding to come back in the morning to check everything. But after a few minutes he realized that the road was winding, and he saw the same sign again, the same curb, the same crack in the asphalt. He was driving in a circle. The panic came slowly. He tried to turn away, but every path led back. Then he stopped, got out of the car, and screamed into the void. The echo did not return. Only a faint whisper, as if someone had repeated his name. Mark closed his eyes and realized for the first time in a long time that he was afraid. Not the light, not the shadow, but the fact that all this is not outside. That the highway is himself. His memory, his guilt, his loss. He didn't sleep that night. He sat by the roadside until it was light. With the first rays of the sun, the fog began to clear, and he saw a figure in the distance. Woman. She stood motionless by the side of the road, in a white dress, her hair fluttering in the wind. My heart sank. It was her. Or what's left of it. He slowly approached, but the closer he got, the more the shadow around the woman darkened until it disappeared into thin air. Only silence remained. And the smell of smoke. He fell to his knees, feeling the tears burn his skin. The world was shaking, and the sun seemed too dim. When he got up, there was a note in the place where the woman was standing. The paper is old and soaked. There are only 3 words on it: "You're already here." The morning froze over the highway with a cold, glassy light. Mark stood in the middle of the road, holding a note in his hand, and did not feel the wind, although he could see the dust shaking. The world seemed exhausted. There was no birdsong, no sound of an engine in the distance, just the dry rustle of leaves, which seemed like the breathing of someone huge and invisible. He read the words again: "You're already here." The paper trembled in my fingers as if it were alive. He walked slowly back to the car. The rearview mirror reflected the empty asphalt, but it seemed to him that the shadow of the "9" sign, which disappeared at night, was still visible, a slight darkening on the side of the road. Similar to a burn mark. When he started the engine, the gasoline needle jerked, as if resisting, and froze. There was a map in the glove compartment, but the number 9 on it had been erased, leaving a white spot. Mark wasn't surprised. He felt that the road did not want to be measured. He decided to get to the nearest city to send the recordings and check the coordinates. After 20 minutes of walking, the kilometer markers began to go out behind my back. 7, then 6, then suddenly 9 again. He stopped the car, got out, ran his hand over the sign. Cold metal, as if it had just been cast. The dust clung to his palms. The highway was spinning around itself like a ribbon. He realized that he was locked in a loop, not physically, but by something else, invisible, pulling from within. The sun rose higher, but it was not warm. Everything looked a little different, like a reflection of the world in murky water. The shadows of the trees were too long, too straight. And they all seemed to be reaching out in one direction, towards him. Mark turned on the recorder, his voice trembling. The third day. It looks like the space is distorted. The coordinates are getting lost. The road takes me back to the 9th kilometer. Perhaps it's not a place, but a state of consciousness. He paused. A thought flashed through my mind, "You're already here." This phrase did not come out of my memory, as if it had been uttered not by a voice, but inside the air itself. He sat on the hood, looking into the distance. The sky was infinitely flat, and a thin layer of mist rose from the horizon, like smoke from a smoldering campfire. While he was sitting, a tape recorder suddenly turned on inside the car. The tape, which had been left on a different frequency for a long time, hissed, and then a quiet, distant sound came from the speakers, as if someone was whispering into a microphone, barely touching the air. The words were indecipherable, but the rhythm repeated itself like a heartbeat. Mark reached out to turn off the tape recorder, but realized that the sound was not coming from the speakers. It came from under the dashboard, as if from the depths of the car itself. He turned off the ignition, but the sound remained. Then he opened the door and got out. The silence instantly fell silent. He closed his eyes and felt a cold wave run down his spine. The world seemed to be watching him, waiting for his next move. Mark took out his camera and pointed it at the curb. Through the lens, everything looked different. The colors faded, the horizon became crooked, and a trembling streak appeared in the center of the frame, as if the air had cracked. He took a step forward and saw that the strip was moving. This is not a defect, but something that crawled along the road, leaving a trail of light. As he approached, the streak faded, but a trace remained in his eyes, a vertical line visible even with his eyelids closed, like a burn on the retina. He got into the car, not turning on the engine, and just waited. Somewhere far away, around a bend, a low rumble was heard. It grew louder, closer, and became like the rumble of wheels. But when the headlights appeared from behind the fog, the road shuddered. The car flew out of the white void, but it was moving without a driver. The seat was empty, and the steering wheel was turning on its own. Mark froze, watching as the car drove past and disappeared into the fog. After a moment, the sound stopped. He got up and walked over to the track. The asphalt was warm. The tire tracks went forward, but stopped at the 10th meter. The air above the place trembled. He realized that this was how those who came here disappeared. Not into the abyss, but into the reflection of the road, into the space between. Mark returned to his car, took out his laptop, checked the camera data. The last shots showed the same passing car, but the seat was not empty in the lens. He was driving himself. The face is distorted, the eyes are completely black. The frame was shaking, as if the lens itself was afraid. Then the recording stopped. It became difficult for him to breathe. He knew that he could no longer trust his technique or his eyesight. Everything he sees may not be through his eyes. He rested his head on the steering wheel, trying to hear something human breathing, footsteps, whatever. But all I heard was a soft, steady tapping. It came from under the floor of the car. He bent down, looked under the seat, and saw what he thought at first was a piece of cloth. But it was a hand. White, thin, as if dried. It stretched from the gap between the panels and disappeared inside the case. He recoiled, his heart pounding. When he looked in again, nothing. Empty. At that moment, he realized that this place wasn't just a trap. It's alive. And it remembers. Towards evening, he noticed an old signboard by the roadside, half hidden by weeds. The letters on it are faded: Millwood Diner, 1 mile. Mark decided to walk. If the sign has been preserved, there may be something left there. He walked slowly, listening to the gravel crunch under his feet. The road curved, and after a few minutes he saw a building, a dilapidated cafe with peeling walls and an extinguished neon sign. The interior smelled of rust and ash. The tables were covered with dust, and there were old cups on the counter, as if someone had just gone out for a minute and never returned. He switched on the flashlight. A ray of light picked out fragments of inscriptions on the walls from the darkness. Do not look into the light. He remembers. The 9th is the entrance. There was a cash register on the counter. The last record was dated 1978. The name is Samuel Hayes. Mark turned to the next page and saw his own name, written unevenly, as if by a child's hand. Below is the date of today. A chill went down my spine. He closed the book and looked around. There was a flicker of movement in the glass of the old refrigerator. He got closer and realized that the glass didn't reflect him, it reflected the road behind him, but without him. Just a shadow, elongated like a thread of smoke. He went outside. The sun was setting, painting the sky in red and black stripes. Somewhere in the distance, a light flashed again, the one that the disappeared had seen. But now he was closer, almost above him. The flash lasted for a second, but the world around us was different. The colors faded, the sound disappeared. Mark stood in the middle of the silence, as if underwater. And then he saw them. There are dozens, hundreds of people standing along the road. All without faces, just silhouettes, trembling like smoke. They were looking at him, even though they had no eyes. He recognized his wife's figure among them by her gait and the curve of her shoulders. She was standing closer than the others. When he took a step, they all moved at the same time, like a reflection copying him. The world tilted, the road became soft underfoot. He realized that the light was a door. But what's on the other side shouldn't have seen the man. In the next instant, everything was gone. He was standing in the same place, but the sky was already black, and the time was different. The clock showed 3 o'clock in the morning. The wind died down. The camera was lying on the ground, broken, the screen was cracked, but the frame was flashing on it, a woman standing at the 9 sign and smiling. She whispers something, but there is no sound. Mark turned off the screen, clutched the camera to his chest, and realized that he didn't remember how he got here. He went back to the car. There was the same piece of paper on the seat. Now there are new words on it: don't look for her. The ink was fresh. He looked around, but there was no one there. But there was something moving behind the trees, like footsteps, quiet, confident. He decided to leave, at least somewhere. The engine started immediately, but the headlights revealed a strange picture. Someone had written his name in charcoal on the asphalt right in front of the car. The letters walked along the road, disappearing into the darkness. He didn't read any further, turned around and drove in the opposite direction. It wasn't until the speedometer needle passed 80 that he noticed something in the mirror that shouldn't have been there. A streak of light, thin as a cut, was trailing behind the car. Shadows flickered out of her, and every time he blinked, there were more of them. At some point, the light caught up with him. The world flashed, and he was back at the 9 sign. At dawn, he wandered along the side of the road, barely feeling his body. My thoughts were confused. He didn't know how much time had passed, a day, 2, a week. The sun seemed artificial, like a lantern behind a curtain. He had seen the same trees, but now silhouettes flashed between them, not people, but their footprints, like fingerprints on glass. He realized that the line between this place and something else had become thinner. And that he himself is a part of this crack. He sat down on the ground and took out a dictaphone. The voice sounded hoarse. If anyone finds this record, the road is not the road. It's a mirror. Everyone who rides here brings a shadow with them. She stays. And when there are too many such shadows, the border opens. I am also a shadow. Maybe it always has been. He turned off the device and looked at the horizon. Where the hills had risen before, there was now light. Not daytime, not electric, but indoor. He realized that this was what he was being led to. The place where it all started. He went there. Every step echoed, as if the road was repeating his movement. The air thickened, became viscous. The light ahead pulsed as if it were breathing. And the closer he got, the more he felt the memories dissolve, names, faces, even pain. All that remained was a sense of duty, as if he had to finish something. At the foot of the hill there was an arch made of stone, half destroyed. There were symbols carved on it, a circle crossed by a line and a spiral. Under the arch was what looked like a well, but without water. The same light was coming from inside. Mark bent down and looked down. Images flashed in the depths, cars, the road, the faces of the disappeared, and finally himself, standing on the edge. He realized that it wasn't just a reflection. It's a different world waiting to be remembered. And then there was a rustle behind him. Someone came up. He turned around and saw his wife's figure. She stood at the edge of the world, smiling. But her eyes were as dark as the abyss. She held out her hand. Mark stepped forward, feeling no fear. The world shook beneath him. The light flashed. When the flash faded, the road was empty. Only the 9 sign was back in place, smooth and clean, as if it had never disappeared. The wind blew a piece of paper across the asphalt. On it were the words, "He came in." The world around Mark was no longer subject to time. The days and nights passed without distinction, as if light and darkness had lost their boundaries. Sometimes he woke up in the car under an ashen sky and couldn't remember falling asleep. Sometimes I found myself on the road, standing in the middle of the lane, with the recorder turned on in my hand, although I did not remember why I pressed the button. The highway was getting quieter every day, and he was beginning to suspect that silence was the real sound of this place. Ever since he'd seen his wife, or what had taken her form, reality had begun to unravel. The photos on the laptop screen changed as he blinked. The recordings in the recorder were being rewritten by themselves, and his own voice was saying words he hadn't said. He came in. But he didn't leave. This phrase was heard on every new recording, regardless of what he was saying into the microphone. He stopped realizing how many days had passed. Memory turned to sand. All he knew was that somewhere beyond the hills there was something waiting. A light that calls him not just out of curiosity, but from the depths of guilt. One morning, he saw that the asphalt at the sign 9 was cracked, and light was oozing out of the crack. Not sunny, but cold, silvery, like moonlight in water. He knelt down, ran his finger over it, and felt a pulse, as if a heart were beating beneath the surface of the road. Suddenly, the light intensified, blinding him, and for a moment he saw something inside the crack, as if another world lay under the road, gray sky, shadows of people, inverted space. He pulled his hand away, but he couldn't look away. There, in the depths, he saw himself, distorted, standing on the other side of the world. He realized that the road is not a place, but a seam. Between worlds, between the living and those who remain in memory. Mark packed up his things, threw the rest of the equipment into the trunk and walked along the road, leaving the car behind. The wheels on the asphalt no longer left footprints, as if she had been standing there for 100 years. He walked for hours, but the kilometer signs did not change. It's always the 9th. Sometimes he saw mirages, cafes, flashing headlights, the voice of the announcer from the radio. It all disappeared if you blinked. At some point, he noticed a man in front. The man was standing with his back to him, motionless, right in the middle of the road. Mark called out, "Silence." Then he came closer. As the distance narrowed, he realized that the figure was not a man. It's a kind of cast, a silhouette from the ashes, in which human features were discernible. When he stretched out his hand, the figure crumbled, leaving behind the smell of ozone and ashes. An inscription remained on the asphalt, as if etched with fire, "We are your shadows." He walked on, and the fog began to shrink. Footsteps, breathing, and voices could be heard inside him. Voices called his name, but in each one he recognized himself. The wind carried phrases like fragments of memories. "You promised. Why did you leave us?" The light remembers. He did not understand who these words belonged to, but he felt that they were from his life. In the evening, he went out to the house. It was small and wooden, as if it had been carved out of a dream. The house stood right on the edge of the highway, as if the road bypassed it. The windows are boarded up, the door is ajar. There was a sign on the doorstep, "Millwood Residence." It was the only house that had survived the fire, which he had read about in the archives. Inside, it smelled of ashes and damp wood. There are photographs on the walls. People were smiling, but they all had no eyes on their faces. In the center of the room is an old, darkened mirror. It reflected the house, but without him. Instead of its reflection, there is a road stretching into infinity. Mark felt his legs grow heavy, as if the mirror was pulling him towards it. Suddenly, there was a thud somewhere above, as if someone had walked through the attic. He climbed the stairs, and every step echoed, as if the stairs were deeper than the house. There was a door at the end of the corridor. Ajar, and a cold breeze was blowing in. There was a dusty album on the floor. He picked it up and opened it. On the first page is a photo of a young woman, his wife. Signed, Elizabeth H., 1978. He froze. It's impossible. She was born 20 years later. As he scrolled on, he could see his own features on other people's faces, the same curve of lips, the look in his eyes, even the mole on his cheek. All the pictures are dated decades before his birth. He felt his breath coming in short gasps. There was another knock downstairs, then a crash. He came down. The mirror below no longer reflected the room. Now there was a road in it, alive, trembling, walking through the darkness. There is light on the horizon. That's the one. Figures began to appear from the depths of the mirror. Blurred at first, then clearer and clearer, people, elongated, transparent, reaching out to him. Among them, he recognized the faces from the photographs. They were all part of this place, part of his memory. He took a step back, but the light blinded him. When he woke up, he was standing on the road. No house, no mirror, just empty asphalt. But there were ashes on his shoulders, and the album was still in his palm. On the last page there is an inscription, "The ninth holds the key, the ninth holds the key." He realized that the 9th kilometer was not just a point. This is the center of the loop, the place where time begins and ends. Everyone who got here became a part of this ring. He remembered how it all started. A letter, a photograph, a light on the road. Then he thought that someone was calling him. Now he knew that the road itself was calling. She chose him because he was already a part of her. The accident, Elizabeth's death, everything was not the end, but the entrance. Maybe he himself once drove along this highway, saw the light and did not return, and everything that happened after that is just a shadow of his former life. Mark decided to find a light source. It seemed to him that if he saw it to the end, everything would become clear. He walked along the road until he saw the lights. Not the same as before, these ones flickered smoothly, almost humanly. There was an abandoned gas station by the curb. The lights on the facade were on, although there were no wires. On the signboard is the number 9 in the form of a ring, as if specially printed. There were old vending machines inside, covered in dust. There is a map of the route on the wall. But when he looked more closely, he realized that the map was moving. Kilometers change places, lines shift, and a small point of light appears at the intersection of all roads. Where it stands now. He walked over to the counter. Behind it is a cash register covered with rust. Inside the cash register is a coin with the number 9 engraved on it. When he picked it up, a sound came from the speaker of the old radio. His voice was heard on the frequency between the noises. "Mark, if you hear this, go away. This is not a road. It's you." He dropped the coin. She fell to the floor, and each blow echoed like thunder. At the same moment, all the lights went on. The light was unbearable, and silhouettes began to appear in it, transparent as smoke. They came from the walls, from the floor, from the air. There were dozens of them. They surrounded him, merging into one. And from that light, as if from a living thing, came a whisper. "You were our key. Now open it." He felt his body losing weight. Everything became light. He saw fragments, a car, a bridge, a mirror, a wife, faces. Everything was mixed up into one. And then the road turned around. He saw an endless ring from above, curved like a snake biting its tail. There is a point of light in the center. The 9th kilometer. He realized that it was here, in this loop, that all the souls lost on the road converge. They don't disappear. They become the light. And this light is calling the living, so that the loop does not close. He was afraid not of the fact that he was going to die, but of the fact that he might have already died. That he himself is a light calling others. When the flash faded, he was back on the track. Everything was as before. Fog. Sign, tree branches. But now there was a sense of completion in the air, like after a long sleep. The recording indicator was on in the car, and the recorder was whispering the last words. "The key has been found." The light opened. Now he's looking for the next one. Mark looked at the horizon. For a moment, he thought he saw another silhouette, a man walking along the road. A new traveler, the one who will arrive after him. The light around them began to tremble, welcoming the approach. He realized that the road lives in a cycle. And that in order to get out, you don't have to fight the light, but accept the darkness. Perhaps the darkness is the only border that doesn't lie. He took a step beyond the curb line to where the trees began, and for the first time he heard a real sound, the rustle of the wind, not distorted. He smiled. But a rumble came from afar. Headlights cut through the fog. Another car entered the 9th kilometer. The light blinked. And the road began to breathe again. 9. When night fell again on the 9th kilometer, the world was quiet, as if after a great sigh. The air became clearer, the sounds became softer, and the headlights of passing cars were not reflected on the asphalt, as if the shadow under it had disappeared. Mark stood at the curb, watching the road stretch into the distance, back to where his story once began. He no longer felt tired. Time became slow for him, like thick water in which memories float. Sometimes he heard voices, not whispers, but echoes. Phrases uttered once, words left on the road, now sounded like part of the wind. He knew it was his breath now. Since the mirror disappeared, he hadn't seen any flashes or lights under the road. Everything became stable, almost real. But reality is a relative concept. For those who live, it's one thing. For those who stayed at the border, it's completely different. He walked along the road, leaving no footprints. His every step was quiet, but the ground vibrated slightly, as if it felt his presence. Cars were rumbling somewhere behind them, but the sounds came muffled, as if through a column of water. Sometimes he saw a truck speeding along the highway, and faces flashed inside the cabin, alive, tired, unaware that just a few steps away from them was a man who had ceased to be a man. He stopped at an old road sign. It said, Millwood, 9 kilometers. Now the sign looked different, the letters seemed to have burned out, and the number 9 turned into an endless symbol, infinity. Mark ran his finger over it, and a trace of light remained in the air, which quickly disappeared. He felt that his connection with the road was not over. Yes, the loop has been destroyed, but the energy itself, the memory that fueled this segment, is still alive. She's waiting. And he knew that if he left, everything would start all over again, because the road doesn't like emptiness. She needs a caretaker. At dawn, Mark went to the place where his car was parked. It was covered with dust and rust, as if it had been there for decades. There's a voice recorder inside, dead but still on. The message on the screen was blinking, "Wreck." He pressed a button, and a crackling sound came from the speaker, then his voice. The voice was calm, almost alien. "If you're listening to this, then the loop has closed. Don't look for explanations. Everything you see is a reflection of fear. The 9th is a mirror. It doesn't show what's there, but what you're afraid to see. If you look too long, you stay." Mark turned off the recording. These words sounded like a message, not so much to the world as to himself. He understood that the person who had spoken them no longer existed. A shadow remained, which now bore his form. He got into the car and turned the key. The engine wouldn't start. Only a faint light came on the panel, and in that light he saw his reflection in the rearview mirror. The reflection was different, a little younger, with eyes full of determination. It was the same Mark who had come here for the first time. They stared at each other for a long time. The reflection smiled faintly and disappeared. There was a handprint-like mark on the glass. He realized that the road had left him with the last task. Complete. Not in the sense of destroying, but closing it forever. So that those who drive on will no longer see the light under the asphalt, so that the whispers will subside. It was a cold day. The sun hung low, almost without warmth. Mark walked along the highway until he reached the place where the crack with the light had once appeared. The asphalt was smooth as glass now. No cracks, no footprints. Just a barely noticeable line, like a scar dividing the canvas. He knelt down and put his hand on it. The ground beneath him was warm. A soft sound came from the depths, like breathing, like a pulse. He closed his eyes. In my mind's eye, the road appeared again, endless, going into a circle. The same light is in the center. But now he wasn't hostile. It was the light of memory. The one that holds everything that once was: faces, voices, footsteps. Everything that a person forgets, the road remembers. He realized that light cannot be destroyed. You can only make it quieter. To do this, you need to give him what's left, the last memory. Myself. He took out a dictaphone and turned on the recording. The voice was trembling, but not from fear. "My name is Mark Hayden. If someone finds it, know that the road no longer calls. But she can still hear. If you feel the light, don't run. Just remember. As long as you remember, she won't pick you up." He put the recorder in the crack, pressed the stop button and covered the hole with his palm. The ground warmed under my hand. Then the light began to rise, soft and golden, like the sunrise. He wasn't blind. On the contrary, he warmed up. Mark stood up. The body became light, almost transparent. He could feel the wind passing through him without encountering resistance. His breath became part of the air. He realized that he was now the voice of the road. But not the darkness, not the whisper. He is a memory that protects the living from the light. After some time, maybe a day, maybe a decade, people arrived at the 9th kilometer again. 2 engineers from the road service came to check the old pavement. One of them turned on the scanner, the other lifted the camera. "Strange," one of them said, looking at the device. "This part of the highway, it does not reflect the signal. It's like there's nothing underneath." The other shrugged his shoulders. Maybe there's a mistake in the data. It's just an old track. They took a few pictures and drove on. In one of the pictures, if you look closely, you can see the silhouette of a man on the side of the road. Transparent, as if made of light and fog. No one noticed it. Over the years, the legend of the 9th kilometer has turned into a story told around a campfire. It was said that a journalist had disappeared there. That at night there is a faint glow there, similar to the breath of the earth. That if you drive too slowly, you might hear someone whisper your name. But no one else disappeared. The road calmed down. Sometimes travelers, passing by, noticed a strange thing. The needle of the speedometer froze for a moment, the radio for a split second caught a quiet crackle, similar to breathing. And then everything returned to normal. Some said that at that moment they felt calm, as if someone was guarding their path. They didn't know it was Mark. He stayed here, between light and shadow, not as a prisoner, but as a guardian. He didn't feel lonely. On the contrary, for the first time I felt a purpose. Now he understood that the road was neither evil nor a curse. She just remembers everything that went through her. And she needed someone who could listen. Now she was listening through him. Time has passed. Maybe years, maybe forever. The seasons changed, the trees aged, the asphalt cracked and patched up again. People changed, cars got faster, but the road remained. Sometimes at night, when the fog was thick, you could see a faint glow on the horizon, the very thing that once frightened travelers. Only now there was no threat in it. It was a quiet sign, like someone's, "I'm here." A small museum of the disappeared was opened in one of the cities near the highway. Among the exhibits is an old dictaphone found under the asphalt during road repairs. The recording shows a man's voice. "Don't run. Just remember." Followed by the sound of wind, like breathing. Visitors rarely lingered at this showcase. But those who stopped later said they felt strangely calm. Sometimes Mark had dreams. In them, he was driving along the highway again, in the early morning, when the sky was just beginning to lighten. Elizabeth was sitting next to him, looking out the window, smiling. There was no pain on her face. The car sped forward, and the road seemed endless, but not scary. The light around them was as soft as breathing. He was waking up, if you can call it waking up, and standing by the side of the road. Everything is the same, the sign, the wind, the distant noise of cars. Only now did he know that everything was going as it should. The road breathes, people live, and the light beneath it no longer calls, it listens. Mark looked at the horizon. For a moment, he thought he saw the sky shimmering with mirror rings, as if time itself were reflected in glass. And in this reflection is the silhouette of a woman walking through the light. She turned around, smiled, and her gaze said everything that needed no words. He replied with a smile and quietly stepped into the shade of the trees. The wind picked up, blowing the dust off the road. The sun rose above the horizon, and the 9th kilometer became just a highway again, forgotten, quiet, but still alive. No one knew that underneath it, in the deepest layer of memory, there is a reflection of a man who once realized that light without darkness blinds. And darkness without light kills. Only together do they give shape to everything that we call life. And where these two worlds touch, a road is born. Since then, they say, if you drive along an old highway in the fog and suddenly feel your heart stop, don't be afraid. It's just that the 9th kilometer remembers you. He doesn't want to take it away. He wants you to remember. Because as long as someone remembers, the light remains alive.